Okay, while we're letting people in, I'm going to do a few announcements. So I want to welcome you all to Hawaiian Islands. I'm Sean Lether, and a special welcome to everyone who is joining us on the Conscious Awakening Network. I want to make a few announcements about our upcoming events. On the third Tuesday of this month, January 21st, we'll be having our monthly Hawaiian Islands Experiencer Sharing Group. Anyone who has had any sort of spiritually transformative experience, not just NDE, is welcome to join us. Just a sec. And we'll put the link to the sharing group in the chat. Also, for details and registration of all of our events, you can join the Hawaiian Islands newsletter, and you can sign up at the top right hand of the January Hawaiian Islands newsletter that we'll put in the chat. This event will be recorded, and you can watch a replay on our Hawaiian Islands YouTube channel. Please, everyone, take a quick moment if you can and subscribe to our channel, which is at youtube.com/Hawaiian Islands. Lastly, I'd like to remind you that these events are a labor of love for us, and it's very important that we keep them free. Your generosity helps keep all of our events free and supports sharing the wisdom of NDEs and STEs with the world. So if you would please partner with us and donate whatever you felt comfortable and helps keep our events free. So we're going to do it a little bit different tonight. I'm in Los Angeles, been here for the holidays, and we're in the middle of a big fire here. So we're going to have tonight's guest. We're going to start out with a short little prayer, and then he will tell his story. So I would like to start out with welcoming tonight's guest, who at 29 years old, Jonathan Van Valin, experienced an NDE that illuminated what it was like to relinquish the body, understand the illusory nature of the usual dimensions, and become one with all. Jonathan's NDE resulted from a complication after surgery. His NDE extended for a couple of days, which allowed him the opportunity to revel in total freedom of the dissolution of self for an extended period. Tonight, Jonathan will share his NDE and many STEs with us. Jonathan is currently working on his first book, and he offers one-on-one transformation sessions in person and via Zoom. You can learn more about Jonathan at www.assistthespirit.com. Welcome, Jonathan. So glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Sean. And as Sean just mentioned, in a thoroughly heart-centered sort of way, we agreed at the outset here that we would offer some goodwill to those who, as many of you probably don't know, the LA areas where Sean and David are located right now is overcome with wildfires. And there is a non-zero chance that someone either loses power or has to depart very quickly, depending on which way the literal, non-metaphoric winds blow. So before we even get into all the rest of it, which we will absolutely do, we thought it a lovely idea to just offer some collective goodwill. And so I want to invite everyone who's here together with us to join together for a moment of quietude, a moment of turning inward. And to me, this is something that is not only very natural, but I enjoyed being asked to do this moment with you, because it's something that also dovetails beautifully with the story I'm going to tell soon after. So I would invite all of you to join me, first of all, in a deep breath. And it's called the physiological sigh. There's some incredible science behind this. Comes out of the Huberman lab, among other places at Stanford University. And it's a way of immediately switching on your body's autonomic nervous system to reach a state of calm. And this is something you could do anytime ever. But if you happen to be in a situation where there was a wildfire approaching, it might be very useful. But if you were also just trying to sit down on a meditation cushion and be quiet for a moment, it can be incredibly useful there too. So it works like this, where you take a deep breath in, hold it for just a moment, and then top it off with another in breath and hold it for a moment. And then we let it out with a little bit of noise. It looks like this. We go like this. And I can explain more about this later if you like, but that is something that immediately turns the body's autonomic nervous system towards opening blood vessels, reducing a bit of cortisol, and overall getting your entire nervous system to just calm down a little bit. So let's do that. I'll lead a couple of those deep breaths together, and then we'll just have a moment of silence. And in that moment of silence, I want to invite all of you inwardly. And to me, it's impossible to do this without very literally joining together, which is a point I hope to come back to, in which we really join in that collective one mind and take an opportunity to um, find that part of our being and find that a little touch of that part of our consciousness, our awareness, that's capable of looking past some of the drama and trauma to a place within that is unmovable. And I know that when people touch that just a little bit, even if it's just a little bit, it becomes possible to look out on the world with a little bit more calmness, a little bit more peace, and to really live and make choices from that place a little bit more. And whether you're on the edge of a wildfire or in the edge of any other kind of difficulty, um, being able to come to it from that place, even just a little bit more, can make all the difference. So I hope you'll join me for a moment and take a deep breath with me. Here we go. Goes like this. Just a moment of collective stillness. Feel free to close your eyes. You need not pay attention to any of the noises around you. They're just fine. And to find a touch of that quiet, still place within. Here we go. All right. Thank you for joining in that with me for a moment. And may some of that stillness and some of that peace accrue to those experiencing a wildfire or to anyone else experiencing any other difficulty. And now we'll tell some stories. So, yeah. At 29 years old, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. It was determined that there was needed to be a surgical solution to that, and I went through a medical procedure that's rarely done these days. There's a lot of reasons that it's rarely done. One of them is that it's a it's a well known for being an exceptionally painful recovery, and that's something I was warned about and warned against. It didn't matter. It still ended up being what seemed like the natural solution in my case. And what this is not is some sort of operating table near death experience. So I went through the surgery. I was in the hospital for 4 days. In it, they removed a great deal of tissue from the back of my throat, the soft palate, the uvula, which I no longer have, a bunch of adenoidal tissue, tonsils, and all kinds of things back there. What was also removed was a few chips of bone in the skull behind my nose, even. And one of the things that makes it a very painful recovery is that these are all very nerve-rich areas of your body. And you have to continue to use them to breathe and to swallow and things like that. And so one of the analogies given me at the outset of this was one of the doctors said, you're going to learn what it's like to break your femur and then have to walk on it for days, which I mentioned only because it was, first of all, true, it turns out. And it was far and away the greatest physical pain I'd ever had to contend with. And I was released from the hospital into the care of my father after 4 days. I'm 29 years old. I'm not a kid, but my father wanted to watch over me, so he took me out to the family house. It was actually on a farm in outside of Ellensburg, Washington, about 2 hours away from the hospital. And there wasn't much for him to do. All he could really do was sort of, you know, come in the room every now and then and make sure I hadn't tipped over or something else. There wasn't much I could do either. And I was in his care on the about the third day, so 7 days after the surgery, and uh, I can. What occurred was I can only describe as an inner click. It was extremely clear, and and it was immediately clear what it was. It was the moment that the life force in me began to fade away, and the body was beginning to die. I didn't yet know why. It didn't make any actual sense to me, but it was extremely clear. And in that moment of that click, there were three things that sort of flooded in simultaneously, three experiences. And the first was the immediate recognition and awareness that I wasn't my body. And that just became a sort of a gentle awareness. But it had this huge consequence because if that body wasn't mine, if it wasn't me, and that there was clearly there was sort of an aware consciousness, aware being that was able to observe the body, but it wasn't itself the body. It was this non-corporeal sense of awareness. And what that meant was that the overwhelming blackout level pain in that body need not be attached to, it need not be mine either. And so in the instant of that recognition was a freedom from this absolutely mind-bending pain. And that is a kind of freedom that's hard to put into words, but freedom nonetheless. I would I'm often asked, like, was it an out-of-body experience? Which I think is a fascinating question. I want to give kind of a subtle answer to it. Because even in that moment, I remember in that moment of recognition, asking myself, where is that? Where is that sense of me then? If it's not the body, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And um, in subsequent time, I ended up having what you might call standard out of body experiences, in which there was a literal experience of being in a different space and looking upon my own body. This was actually a few years later, long after this NDE experience, but there were a couple of experiences which I actually got to visually perceive my own body from a different vantage point outside that body in a very classic sort of out of body way. And this was not that. At the moment of recognizing my body was beginning to die, what it actually was recognizing that the body had a sort of illusory quality to it, and that body clearly wasn't me, and in fact had never been me. It had never contained me. It was not a meaningful limitation. It had this illusory quality to it that um, the experience of it was that that body had well, it had simply never contained that aware being. And in that sense, it wasn't meaningful to think of it as being outside or inside it. In any case, the second thing that flooded in that moment was an awareness that the life force in this body was draining away, and it was draining away relatively slowly. It was, at least in that moment, it appeared as though there would be probably a couple of days before it really went all the way. And what I found striking about it in that moment was that it didn't evoke any sense of panic. It didn't evoke any sense of that being a problem. The attitude that immediately arose was, oh, it looks like I'm going to have a little while, some time to revel in this, to get to experience it. And the freedom of being apart from the pain already, being free of the suffering of it was so great that my response to my body dying, beginning to die, was not, oh no, this is a problem. It was, oh my God, this is fascinating. And that body isn't really me, anyways. And so there's a way in which this aware consciousness, this aware being, this non corporeal sense of being, wasn't threatened in any way by whether that body lasted a while or went quickly. It didn't really matter. It didn't seem like a big deal. It wasn't a problem. And so rather than this being a moment of panic, it was a moment of fascination. It sort of drew me into the experience more, like, wow, let me pay attention. The freedom from the pain, it doesn't mean that that the pain itself in the body was gone. It was as present as ever. What it was really showing me was the difference between pain and suffering. The pain remained, it was there in that body. I just wasn't suffering from it. I didn't need to attach to it. I didn't need to think of it as me. And so it could kind of do and be as it was, whatever it was. I wasn't suffering from it in any way. The title of this evening was something like, um, things you could use to shorten the journey. And this is among them. And the reason I see it that way is that a lot of people have, when they contemplate matters of death and dying, common thing that you hear is someone saying, well, it's not that I'm afraid of dying, but I don't really want to be in pain. And here's a couple of ways in which that this might impact that. One is that we do get to learn from other people's experience, which is terribly good news. One of the reasons I'm delighted and glad to be able to share tonight is so that you don't actually have to go through mind-bending pain. That's wonderful. I'm delighted to be able to play that role. You don't have to be in a car crash. You don't have to nearly die in an operating table or any other thing to learn from some of these beautiful experiences that people share. What brilliant, beautiful grace that is. But another is that it really is possible to to have an experience in which the pain that is present in a body doesn't have to cause any suffering at all. And if you've ever been with someone who was dying and appeared to be suffering, it's quite possible that there was also more to the story. I don't mean to suggest in any way or take away the experiences people have that are often difficult and painful. But it is possible for there to be an alternative. And that's wonderful, good news. And I hope that being here tonight opens some minds and hearts to that possibility, so that if or when those moments come, there's an alternative. In any case, there was a third thing that flooded in the moment of recognizing my body was beginning to die. And the fact is, it kind of blew away these other two, even though there was such tremendous freedom experienced already. And it was that while there was already this experience that that this aware beingness that wasn't the body, and therefore it didn't need to be troubled by the body's troubles, it was still a very individuated experience. It was sort of like, it's still an individual sense of me. It's just the boundaries of that have grown bigger so that I didn't have to presume them to be limited by that body. But it's still a very individuated sense of self, just a non-corporeal one. And in this third recognition, it was that even that individuated but non-corporeal sense of self was beginning to dissolve. It was beginning to lose its individuality. And you might think that would sound a little scary, but it was in fact the absolute opposite. Because that individuated but non-corporeal self was dissolving into what I can only describe as overwhelming allness, all-encompassing allness. It gets difficult to describe because you end up leaning into these non-dual sounding phrases like oneness and wholeness. And the thing about it is that if something is utterly and completely whole or absolutely all-encompassingly all, then it's missing nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the beauty of that dissolution then was that because it contained absolutely everything, there could not possibly be a sense of loss. And there wasn't. There couldn't possibly be any sense of lack or want or need because it contained all. There was nothing missing at all in it. And if there's no possible sense of lack or want or need, there's essentially no possibility for there to be fear. Many of you here tonight, I'm sure, have heard the phrase that love is the opposite of fear. And there's a great deal of truth to it, it turns out. So the experience of dissolving into that all-encompassing allness was that it really just resulted in a feeling of overwhelming peace, the kind, if I quote a popular source, the kind that passes all understanding. And so when my father came into the room, a man that I had a good relationship with, but it hadn't always been that way. I'd struggled with my relationship with my father as a young person, as many do. But when he came into that room and just had a look to see how I was, I couldn't really do anything other than look at him, look back at him in a way that was just sort of overwhelmingly loving. And that's all I did. I knew that I couldn't possibly explain what I was experiencing to him. I couldn't possibly explain that I and my body were two different things, and one of them was essentially irrelevant. I couldn't explain what it was like to dissolve into the all-encompassing allness. And since after all, I was sitting right here, um, and even if I could have put it into words, I don't think I would have. There was such a feeling of completion and again missing absolutely nothing, that there was no impulse to try to put it into words. Everything was perfect already the way it was, including the fact that I knew my body was beginning to die. That didn't move the needle at all. It didn't cause any even molecule of suffering or an idea like this is wrong or bad or shouldn't be this way. It seemed absolutely fine. The fact of my body dying couldn't disturb my own peace in any way whatsoever. And so it didn't. And I think all of you can probably, every single person here on some level can relate that when you have felt absolutely the most peaceful, it's it's really very natural to feel kind and gentle and essentially more or less loving to whomever or whatever is around you. They just kind of go together. And so that's how it was. He came into the room. I smiled at him and said absolutely nothing. And he was satisfied and twirled around and went back to whatever chores he was doing. And he'd be back again in a little while. And that's how the entire rest of the afternoon went and into the night. And it's been 7 or 8 days since the surgery. Again, most of it had been an experience of absolute hell in terms of the level of pain and so on. I barely slept because of the pain. And so a thought arises like, gosh, maybe I could even get some sleep. That sounds amazing. So I do so. I go to bed. I'm sort of checking in with my, on this the whole time. Uh, as every molecule of life force drains away, it feels like there's an equal and growing dissolving into the infinite, into the allness. They're perfectly matched. As um, I lay down and I go to sleep and I wake during the night. And every time I wake up, I check in. Am I still dying? Is the life force still draining away? Yes, it is. And it's beginning to go a little faster. It's draining away a little faster now. But has my experience otherwise changed? Absolutely not. It's just a simple, exquisite experience of the peace that passes all understanding without even the possibility of any suffering. I wake in the morning and it's quite a bit more advanced. I recognize that I don't know exactly when I would cross the final threshold, but it still occurs to me that it's probably a day and a half, maybe 2 days away. But it's approaching and the process is speeding up. About which it appears, it presents to me, that threshold presents to me as, surprisingly to me, it presents itself as a choice, like a choice that it takes no effort in any way whatsoever, merely a choice. I could go that way, or I could somehow choose not to. And um, even at the time, and still to this day, I find it a fascinating moment because why wouldn't one go towards the peace that passes all understanding and absolute love? It's a good question. In which there's no sense of lack or want or need of any kind, and nothing is missing. And so I was a little bit surprised. I was startled that was a thought that arose in my mind that said, I don't think I'm going to go. I kind of want to, like, it's so close. It's like a debate almost, but 51% I'll stay, 49% I couldn't be happier to go. Why wouldn't you? And yet I'm surprised that again this thought arises in me that just says, I think I'm not going to. I think I'm not done here. which immediately evoked the thought, well, what are you supposed to do? All right, if you're not done, well, all right, Jonathan, what is it? What are you going to do here? And I thought, I really have no idea. I'm 29 years old. I'm flailing around. I'm nominally a grown up, but if I was honest with myself at the time, I would say to anyone, if I was really honest at the time, I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Do I have a career? Kind of, not really. What am I doing on this planet? But I think I'm not done here. And for, I don't even know why, but I guess I'll have to try to figure that out. I think I'll stay. So one of the questions I've often gotten were, come on, man, where were the tunnels of light? What about angels? Did you see any aliens? Where were the loved ones? Did you see your old relatives? I have to say, in my case, that I absolutely did not. There was none of that in any way. And yet, I have to stress that in my experience, um, there was such an overwhelming and all-encompassing allness that there couldn't possibly be a sense that something was missing. It was sort of, if I had to bring it down to a sort of really, really, human level, I would have to say, well, it was like they were all there anyways, because how could they not be included in the allness? And there was a genuine and palpable sense that whether I'd had that direct experience of, literally meeting dead loved ones from the past, that again, there's no way they couldn't have been included. That there was no, I just knew they were all already there, whether I met them or not. And it was such a feeling of, uh, well, of allness, that again, nothing could be missing, not even them, no matter how I conceived of it. And it wasn't terribly shocking after having gone through these thoughts that day that at some point, it was well into the afternoon, my father, he's come in and checked on me from time to time. Again, there's really not much he could have done, even if he wanted to. But he would come in, and this time, for the first time in days, he takes a look at me, he squinches his face up, and he just says, Jonathan, I think something's not right. I think we better load up and go back to the hospital, which is no small thing. It's over a 2-hour drive. We're way out in the country, and I'm in no hurry because again, the idea that this situation is wrong or needs to be reversed, or that there's some reason it shouldn't be happening, uh, it's not even a part of. It's just not a part of my experience in any way whatsoever. But I had already just sort of recently, earlier that day, sort of landed on this. Really, it was more of a feeling than a thought, which was, I think I'm going to stay. That seems like the right thing. I can't figure out why, but I think it is. And so when he says it's time to go back to the hospital, I think, okay, there we go. We'll go back. I guess I'm staying. And he takes me to the hospital that originally conducted the surgery. I'm taken into the ER, and immediately upon admittance, the doctors confirmed for my father. So this is the first moment he's really gotten up to speed. They confirmed to him that I'm dying, but I'm dying for the dumbest reason in medical science. I'm dying from dehydration. And having had the surgery that I had, and having been out of the hospital for so many days and so on, uh, had made it, well, it had been essentially impossible to eat or drink. It's so dumb. And well, without getting into a debate about that, sometimes that's healthcare in America. But it also means that in my case, not only is it absurd that I'm in these shoes, it's also a very easy fix. So they poke an IV bag into my arm with saline solution in it, and the instant they connect that, I can feel that saline solution pour in. I can feel the life force that's been draining this whole time reverse and begin to flow back in. And I can feel that dissolving, that merging with the infinite begins to reverse. And it's very clear. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to put my feet back on the ground here. And that's met with essentially a happy response because that choice had been made. And I begin to reconcile with coming back here. As soon as the issue was solved and that it was just a matter of dehydration, again, that's a pretty simple fix. And I made the determination that regardless of how much it hurt, well, I would at least drink something. I'd already lost 12 pounds in a matter of days from total lack of eating, um, which wasn't a problem. But as anyone who's been around that sort of thing knows, it's you can not eat for quite a while, but if you don't drink for 3 or 4 days, you're in huge trouble. It also means that when you begin hydrating again, that your recovery and your healing speeds up unbelievably quickly. I wish someone maybe had told me that earlier, because my recovery just jump started and the pain levels came way down. The healing just seemed to really accelerate. In any case, 3 weeks later, I've I've left the farmhouse. I've returned to my own place. I've returned to my job, and I also returned to a world in which I am utterly baffled about how to reconcile what I'd experienced with being late for work and chowing a breakfast burrito in my car as I drove through traffic and feeling like that job was really important, that this body was really important. And yet I felt as though I knew what I knew and I'd seen what I'd seen and experienced what I'd experienced. And I knew there was more to the story. And so my response to this, my response to not being able to reconcile those things was first of all to bury it. So I simply never spoke about it, even though people asked me, "Oh, how'd it go? How'd it go at the surgery?" And you know, I would fail to mention the merging into the infinite part. But it stuck with me. And what it really did was turn me into a spiritual seeker, and that's in part not only because of the experience that I've just described to you, but there were elements of that experience that I'd actually encountered before when I was a child, when I was a teenager. We don't have time to go into all the stories today, but there were a few touch points there that had sort of been expanded on and deepened in this dramatically. So this NDE was in fact a pivotal experience in my journey. But I can tell you unequivocally, it was not the most pivotal, actually, not even close. It was a very powerful sign that turned me dramatically in a direction that I may not have turned without it. But what ensued over the next really decade or so, a little over a decade, was a desire to reconcile what I'd experienced. And what that led to was a range of other experiences, none of which I saw coming. Those included things like some additional moments in which I ended up seeing very, very, very clearly the difference between pain and suffering. That can be a very handy thing. There were some out of body experiences coming my way. There were some past life memories coming my way. Among the more dramatic and unexpected moments was a complete and total breakdown in which I saw it's a little hard to, well, you can only say the words and can take them, people take them as they will. But it was a moment in which, first of all, I experienced the collective pain of my own life. It was like having a life review, except it was the worst face of it, in that I got to experience in one moment all the collective pain, emotionally and physically, that I'd ever experienced, which then got even worse as that experience sort of expanded, and it felt as though the the mind of my own mind that sort of seemed to contain all these experiences sort of expanded its own boundaries to what presented itself as much more in line with truth with a capital T, that these seeming individuated minds that we have are really fragments of a collective whole. And so the experience turned from my own collective pain into feeling the collective pain of 8 billion souls, which was a level of overwhelm that I absolutely cannot put into words. I won't even try. Um, but it was another one of those very, very pivotal moments. And it led to the most pivotal. Um, what experiencing the collective pain of mankind, which began to be something that would crop up. It was not the last time that would crop up. It would crop up many, many times from that point forward. Um, but in the day or two following that experience, of course, it was followed the next day by an experience that was so much like the NDE, in the sense that there was an experience of my own mind stepping back in a way. I've often thought of it as the backward step, and stepping back from the perspective, the point of view, and the experience that this body, this limited sense of self here, is the whole story. In fact, stepping back from that and seeing that that body had an illusory quality to it, and that when stepping back in that manner, it was possible to sort of expand those boundaries and then expand them again to the point that there was sort of a loss of that individuated sense at all into the overwhelming allness. And in that pain and suffering, even the collective suffering of mankind, um, was rendered uh, transcendable. But that was still quite mind bending, and so I spent the next few days trying to reconcile it. And I also was trying to go to work in the end and deal with ordinary things, and looking at what was at the time my business partner and thinking, I don't know how to experience the collective pain of mankind and still worry about whether or not we have stamps. And it led to questioning, like, how do I connect the dots on these things? And the answer that was presented internally um, was three simple words. How do you transcend suffering? And the three simple words were: give up judgment. There's a lot to unpack there. And I would say I spent the next many years unpacking that statement. Um, but I also spent the next many years sort of wavering in and out from this experience of seeing what it was like to look inwardly and find that that individuated sense of self wasn't as solid as I thought. And by looking over and over and over and over and over, um, eventually came again through sort of a series of experiences that in which that it would sort of swing in and out. My sense of being an individuated sense of self, um, which seems very normal and very ordinary. It's very reasonable. It still is, for the record. But that would swing into this experience of recognizing the sort of overwhelming, all-encompassing wholeness in which that individuated self was not even necessary. And in that state was also that peace that passes understanding. And so it was because of that peace that made it seem like it was the only reasonable direction to go in. But going in that direction also seemed hard to reconcile with regular life. And when you're young, if you're in your 30s and you've got a mortgage and you're trying to make your way in the world, it seems a little outrageous too. Eventually, that search ramped up in a way that was so ferocious that I did that thing that sometimes you hear about in spiritual stories, and it began to be the only thing I could focus on at all. I couldn't pay attention to anything else. And so, right before my 40th birthday, I I sold my half of the biz to my business partner. I sold my car. I said goodbye to the lovely woman I'd been with for some time. I gave the keys to my home to someone I barely knew, and I disappeared for months. And sat and I think we probably don't have time for all the details, but there came a moment in that journey in which that that sense of an individuated self being seen as essentially a charming falsehood, um, kind of the dam broke, and it felt as though that settled in and settled in a way that was permanent. And I can honestly say it has never left. And it doesn't mean that I haven't gone through the ups and downs, the slings and arrows of a very ordinary life. Otherwise, there are many ways in which I have. But it is at the very, very heart of why, at the beginning of um, this Zoom call, that I invited everyone into a moment of silence. And from my point of view, what that silence holds is the possibility of stepping, just even for a moment, for a split second, for a molecule, into that all-encompassing wholeness, that oneness, and touching it potentially for just a moment. And for me, that is, I asked everyone to join me in that moment. And I mean that very literally, because from my point of view and from my very literal experience, it's impossible to touch that without it being collective. Because after all, if it contains absolutely all, then it contains you too. And so to invite you into that, to me, is not a coming together of separates. It's an actual recognition of that overarching tremendous oneness in which our separation from each other seems rendered utterly fictional. And so it's impossible for it not to seem like a collective experience, a joining experience. And it's that more than anything that I would hope to, in some small way, communicate to others. There's a lot more to the story than just this seeming separated self and all the baggage that goes with it. To me, that's very good news. And with that, I figured we'd open it up to some questions,
Yeah,
comments.
you guys want to put your questions in the chat, and we'll ask Jonathan. But what I'd like to know first is what's really cool about your experiences. It just reminds me that each one of these NDEs that are like highly individualized. Like you
Yes.
said, you didn't experience, the tunnel, which most people don't actually.
Mm-hmm.
But they all seem to be highly individualized for what we need the most.
Yeah.
So what would you say in your ND that like what do you feel like your main lesson was that you learned the most from it?
It was a really powerful shove towards the journey I was about to embark on. It's hard for me to conceive of having gone in the direction I went without the NDE. And that's why I've often thought of the NDE as a powerful signpost and certainly a pivotal moment, but not the pivotal moment. Often people describe it as the pivotal moment for them, and I have an enormous amount of respect for that. It easily could be. I think for many it is. And But for me, it was something that shoved me in this direction, forced me to reconcile with what had come through in that experience, and that took years, for the record. I mean, I spent a little over the next decade before going through another. To me, there's so many words we could use, and all of them kind of fail to some extent. But if we want to call them awakening experiences or enlightenment experiences or just a shift, we could just call it a shift in perspective and leave it at that. Frankly, if we don't need to attach too much baggage to it. And the Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that for the moment. um, I can't. I'll add one more thing, Sean. It's be it, Touching that experience of that overarching wholeness is um, it has such a cascading effect through absolutely every aspect of this life, for sure. Um, I I I I look at and see and experience and move through the world in a way that is absolutely qualitatively different. It took over a decade for that to sort of settle in after this NDE, but it's the shift into that dramatically qualitatively different way of being in the world that has been the um, well, it's been the result. And it's still something that even through that shift, one of its effects was a utter and total disinclination to talk about it. Um, and it didn't mean that I felt that I didn't want to share it. It was just that the idea of sharing it from an egoic perspective, like, hey, I got a story I have to tell you. It's really important, just sounded absurd to me because I've just spent an entire hour explaining how really a sense of an individuated sense of self dissolved and wasn't that important in the whole thing. And that was true. And so, like, to do so from that sort of egoic perspective just didn't make any sense. It still doesn't. And so when I went through that subsequent shift, one of the oddest things about it was that I nearly stopped speaking entirely for over a year. And that is a weird way to be a grown up in this world, which is actually why I eventually just left again. Actually, I took a backpack and I wandered the globe for almost 2 years. And for the first year and year and a half of it, I barely spoke a word. And if any of this was shared in any way, it was shared in ways that were utterly without words. And that's one of my favorite ways. It's also why I am so delighted to have shared a moment of pure silence with everyone here tonight.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, something that you said that was really wonderful. It took me a year or two to realize, the ND is just the beginning for many of us. Like,
Yeah.
we think, wow, this is amazing. It's the end. But at some point I realized, no, that was just the beginning of the journey. We just had a
Yeah.
glimmer of awakening.
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you, man. And I'm thanks for saying that. Like, one of the things that I didn't actually know that the NDE as a community even existed until about 2 years ago when I finally wrote an article that had to do with this. And I literally had no idea that there was this worldwide appetite for such things. And I was perfectly happy not saying a word. Um, but the Uh, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Oh no, got caught boarding at the station. Um, the I could just, if I may have just a second. Um, mm, Sometimes a bit of sleep deprivation will do that to me. But yeah, um,
It'll come back to you, no worries.
it will.
That's
It just did actually.
oh good.
We don't need to all have the same experience. Um, and these NDEs that we tell, sometimes people look upon this as outrageous and extraordinary and unusual, and that sort of thing. And like, I've had people say, "Gosh, I wish I had one of those experiences." And I want to say, "Are you sure?" So
Careful
you want
what
to
you
go
ask
through the?
for.
What about the car crash part, or the dying on a surgical table, or being in a coma, or are you sure you want to do that? Um, and the fact is that we all need a different set of experiences. Mine is not a model for anyone other than me at all, but there is a commonality, I would say all of us share it. So I mean, absolutely at the heart of my own experience was something that showed in a form that was very particular to me, how, and I can't say it without it sounding almost like a cliche, but it came down to something that was so overwhelmingly loving and peaceful. Um, and that is something that can be shared and experienced by every single one of us on the planet. And let's be clear, every single person watching the screen tonight, and every other of the 8 billion of us on this planet right now, there's no one among us, even the most wretched, who hasn't touched, at least in some small way, something that was loving at some point, whether it came to them or flowed from them. Every single person among us. This is one of the ways in which we are more alike than we are different. Every single person among us has experienced some touch of that lovingness in some way. And in that fashion, they too have experienced what is absolutely miraculous. In some way, they've touched what is absolutely at the heart of the experience I've tried to describe. And in that way, it's one of those ways in which, to me, it all collapses back into something that's just one thing. And
Yeah.
yes, the outward expression of it, the outward forms of it may shift, they may change, they may be different for you and for me. But if that remains somehow at their core, and I don't see how it could be otherwise, then, well, here we are. You need not have my experience. Have your own. That's what's far more important. And love will lead you to it.
Yeah, and that's really important because what's ironically in one of my Facebook groups, we have some guys saying that because everybody's saying these different experiences, therefore near-death experiences aren't real. And and so some people don't understand that they're highly individualized. But
Yeah.
once you get to that place of unconditional absolute love and
Mhm.
oneness, that's where they all intersect.
Yeah. I happen to agree with you on that point, Sean. I will. I hope it's okay to put it this way. I'll go to my grave with that one. And yeah, there's people out there that have had really difficult experiences. I'm not discounting that at all. There are people that have experienced death and dying in ways that don't quite track with what I've said. Again, their experience
Right.
has
Yeah.
not been the same. Um, but uh, but this human experience that we have still seems to be utterly and totally oriented towards peeling that onion a little bit more and a little bit more in whatever ways are needed and meaningful to each of these seeming individuals to get to the heart of something that ultimately turns out to be loving.
Yeah,
So,
and not everyone needs an NDE. I
no,
think sometimes
absolutely
us
not.
NDErs were just, at least me,
Yeah,
I'm a little more
yeah.
stubborn. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things that I've enjoyed, being connected to all the folks out there, are that so many of them have had so many fascinating experiences, including all these things that also sometimes get a little over evaluated, let's say, in terms of now I've got a healing ability, and now I've got intuitive abilities and things like that, and I ended up experiencing those things as well. there's such a wide, vast range of these kinds of things, in fact, and to be overly focused on any one of them as being the thing or the, again, it's so individualized, and it's so what's meaningful to one as a learning construct is so different for another. Um,
Right.
there, it's a I do find it a bit of a foolish errand to try to, evaluate uh, where, someone might be in their own journey based on those kinds of factors. Um, I've met people that had extraordinary abilities that were absolute assholes. I've also met people with none of those abilities that were absolute angels. Um, and it's a tricky business to evaluate in those terms, But um, yeah, let's
It's
just
funny that you said that because, the way that I choose speakers has nothing to do with their story. In fact,
mm,
most of our speakers, I won't even know their story,
mm,
but you can tell because of the after effects. Do you feel love?
mm,
Do you feel um non-judgment
yeah,
and the non-specialness? And like you were mentioning, these gifts and everything are amazing, but we all have them. It's just some
mm,
people have a little more connection with them. But that's a
mm,
challenge, and that's what is a great thing for you to maybe share is it's very natural after an NDE or awakening up first to feel a little special, which is
mm,
the opposite
mm.
of the
Yeah,
experience, right? Because
yeah,
it's oneness. So
yes,
how do you for yourself, because there is that, especially the first time, or the
mm,
first awakening experience, you feel a little special. I
mm,
remember, I'm back here in California, and I went back to Santa Barbara for Christmas, which is the first place that I had an awakening way back when I was 18. So it's
mm,
like 30 years ago. And
mm,
I remember when I was 18, it was like I felt a little special then.
mm,
And I worked on it
mm,
and had to be humbled more,
mm,
for the next 30 years.
mm.
And but so how do you keep yourself connected to that oneness? Because it is hard sometimes in this world of duality.
Yeah. Um, I utterly and totally grant that. I mean, it's this is the perceptual forms of this world do seem extraordinarily compelling. That's kind of how they're built. They're built to have us sort of make us forget, really. Um, and it's through listening to some part of you that is beyond this world that leads you out of it. And I mean that in the most positive sense. I don't mean that obviously in some sort of dreary sense. Um, but one of the ways I could describe my own journey in sum total without any of the other details has been, I feel like it's been a journey of increasingly listening to a kind of inner guidance, frankly, that seems cut from that absolutely all-encompassing oneness. And um, I would say that again, one way of describing the journey I feel like I've been on has been, um, yeah, increasingly listening to it. I mean, as far as actually answering your question, which I haven't really done yet, I would say there are two things, but what I just mentioned is among those. That in my case, first of all, the way I experienced what I experienced, especially some years on from that NDE, having gone through this whole other shift, there did come a point where occasionally people, I would occasionally end up in situations in which something interesting happened, or the healing experience of someone, or some kind of intuitive thing had happened, and in every single case, without fail, it was clear to me that the the how do I even put it, the that what had taken place absolutely didn't have anything to do with me as an individual. that it was essentially, there's the phrase of, that it's what moves through the hollow reed, not the reed. That but that was so thorough that it, any kind of even molecule of an idea of taking credit for it seemed laughable. It seemed absurd. And so I just could, it was impossible to kind of to see it that way. And so occasionally in those situations, someone would say something to me like, "Hey, thanks for that," or something. And initially I would be like, "Oh, no, 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 you've misunderstood. Um, that isn't me. That wasn't, it's not like that at all." And I would go through this sort of awkward, you know, thing. And there did come a point eventually, quite a bit later, where I realized sometimes it's very, very appropriate to just say, "You're welcome. And I'm glad we're all here." Um, uh, Sometimes that was appropriate, but um, the experience I would keep having in those kind of situations was that I would meet with this person, go inwardly to that quiet place, which had become a sort of automatic, natural place to be and to visit and to just turn my attention to. Um, and uh, and in that moment would be a sense of joining with them in that what was completely whole here met what was there and saw that it was absolutely identical. It was the same wholeness. And like, so it was just, again, this overarching experience of this is so whole that it's missing nothing. And in that sense, there can be nothing broken because there is no sense of there being something wanting or needing or being missing in any way. And so it was sort of like looking completely past whatever perceptual form it was taking to a sort of an underlying wholeness that seemed far more real, far more palpable. Um, and that it was very, very clear that that was being done from a frame of reference that had nothing to do with this as an individuated personal self. And that was so reinforced so constantly that there was just no mistaking it. Um, and it's also one of the reasons why I just decided to be silent and not talk, because I couldn't figure out how to talk without screwing that up. And so I just didn't a lot.
I was the same
uh,
way for 2 years. I kept
yeah,
thinking I was so much smarter over there. Now I can't even string together a sentence to describe what I experienced.
yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. I really know what you mean. Um, so,
So
um,
what was your guidance or your experience before? So you're listening to the guidance more after the NDE. How about before?
I mean, I think I probably came into this world in general with a bit of a sense of that, and without boring anyone with the details, my story of origin is really a bit chaotic in many respects, and um, if I wasn't following my inner guidance, there sure as hell wasn't anything else going on elsewhere to be following, to for the most part. So I think it was something that was actually, in a way, a bit ingrained in a way that was just sort of required. um, and and that sort of thing. But it ramped up over time and took a quite a leap, post NDE. Like you don't ditch your entire adult life unless you've had some real powerful impulse to do that. And then, going through some subsequent doorways and shifts and so on and so forth. Again, it just seemed like um, post shift that it's like there is no other thing. There is nothing else to follow. There just isn't. Like it sounds absurd to be listening to any other, so anything else. I don't want to paint too much of a black and white picture of that, because I still there's still ways in which my basic humanity still informs the picture.
Right.
um, but I still come at the world in general from a place that really did take a an utterly, completely qualitative shift. And one of the ways I could describe that shift was that operating in the world primarily through that sense of guidance as the number one beacon just became even more so to a very it's kind of we wouldn't be here today if it weren't so.
Right. How long did it take for your marriage? Was that 10 years or right
Um,
away? How was
well,
that?
I wasn't actually married, but I'd been with this lovely woman for 3 years, and when it's a long story, but uh, that that was someone that I absolutely love and adore to this day, and has been in and out of my life. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be taking her to an airport so that she can move to France on a different continent. And so there have been ways in which our lives have been deeply intertwined and also going like this. And it's one of those, I mean, that's really, honestly, it's actually quite a towering example of, um, for me anyways, of following what that guidance seems to say more than some of the other um, more um, well, typical sources might tell me. Um, we parted for many years actually, and came back together some years later, and um, yeah, remains one of my favorite people that I love and adore.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, a lot of relationships changed because I realized that in many cases we were playing roles and they were real
Yeah.
relationships.
hmm
Like and many of them were also transactional.
hmm
And so that's why I was asking, like, so did you experience that with any relationships?
I did. Yeah, I began to experience all of them as having been surprisingly transactional. And like there was a process of sort of revelation in that where it was like, wait a minute. Uh, wow. The degree to which that sort of the egoic separated part of mind has been driving this as opposed to something else driving it, like something really loving, just really not so caught in that particular loop. It was a fascinating and shocking and tumultuous transition because there were what really happened is I lost a tremendous number of relationships, not out of any angst. It was just that they began to seem when those transactions began to seem just essentially empty. They lost their value. And so if something doesn't really seem to have any value, there isn't really a huge sense of loss in it going away. And so what happened was a very, really, for the most part, gentle process of just things falling apart. and and there not even really being that much of a sense of angst about it. It was just like, oh, I think we're not doing that anymore. Also, I love you, and I'm going over here now because that's what seems called for. And I might be oversimplifying some of it, but there were, at one point in my life, I was one of those people that had a huge Rolodex, and that went away completely. And yeah, yeah. So it was
Yeah.
mostly a process of an enormous amount of falling away.
Right. And you had a business and you had a house.
Yes.
And so how is your life different now? What is it like for you now? And what do you
Uh,
value now? What you valued then?
um, well, for the first part of adulthood, it was just trying to make my way in what you might call the conventional manner and being worried about all the things that one would be worried about in terms of like what's going on in my social life and my relationships and at some point, am I ever going to buy a house? Oh my God, I bought a house. Oh my God, now what do I do? Uh, the finances and all of it, just very, very, conventional in many respects. And I really I walked away from all of it. One of the things that happened was I came back from all of that at one point, and the person I'd given the keys to my home to gave them back. And I then, at another point, tried to give them away again to a dear friend. Like, do you want to? I mean, I know it sounds nuts on a certain level. It is nuts on a certain level. But my own literal energetic investment in these things had just dropped to zero. So um, I had said, I mean, I know this would make you feel better. Do you want the house? And I was sincere in the moment, really sincere. And I remember vividly them looking at me like, "Are you nuts? No, that's nuts. You keep the keys." And I was like, "Oh, I mean, all right." And that's why I still had the house. Um, and um, and I had it for a bunch more years until I sold it 3 weeks ago. Um, and it's not a big deal, but um, the what does life look like right now? The last bunch of years has been um, sort of an increasing act of opting to come more and more out of that silence, frankly, and um, and I've done so sort of grudgingly, to be perfectly honest. Like I'd actually gotten quite comfortable in it, quite comfortable. Um, but there began to seem a sort of nagging a part of my mind that was like, this is you might be swinging in a hammock with your metaphoric hat pulled down over your eyes here. Um, but what are you going to do? You're just going to kill time till time kills you? Like it began to seem um, like it just wasn't what was called for. And it's taken a bunch of years, the last most recent years, to get kind of reconciled with that, frankly. And I have grudgingly acquiesced more and more to essentially listening to that inner direction that is essentially, well, you might as well be useful. You might as well be useful. All right, all right, that's what we're doing here. Um, and that's taken a lot of different forms, but that yeah. So um, these days, um, I've pretty much given up on all the usual functions of regular adulthood,
Right.
um, and am basically uh, devoting myself to um, writing right now. So there is in fact a book project, and to sharing what I can share in the ways that I can share it. And sometimes that involves talking to people like this, and sometimes it talking to people one on one, and sometimes it's being, doing things with groups of people and doing healing work with people and intuitive work and things like that. Um, and I have a long history of being very happy on the road, so I've traveled a lot to do that, and I think that'll probably ramp up. Um, yeah, anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
so somebody would like to know, you had talked about let me find it again. Uh Judgment, letting go of
mhm,
judgment. They wanted to know
yeah,
how you did that.
yeah, and sometimes it's still, you know, one of those things that uh, how do you do that? That is a brilliant question, And before I even attempt to answer it, I whoever's asking that, if we could just meet right here, right now, for just a moment, and I could give you every encouragement possible to hang on to that question and continue to ask it, because that's something that is going to, the way that you hear the answer is going to change over time. And that will only really manifest for you if you continue to ask it. And that will be a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant experience for you over time. Um, how does one give up judgment? Wheel.
Or how did you? Because I think everyone's a
Mm,
little different. For me, it was allowing and having a 360 view,
mm,
like realizing I don't know what's good enough for me, let alone anybody
yeah.
else.
Yeah. I mean, that's largely at the heart of my own answer, which is there there became increasingly an awareness within me that I wasn't actually capable of judgment. That um, that my own ego framework is so limited that if that's the place I'm coming from in making judgments, which is always the case, it's the ego that does the judging. Spirit has no need for it, but my yeah, there's an increasing awareness that egoic framework just wasn't really capable. And so it was natural over time, the more I let go of, um, or rather leaned into that experience, that truth, it's natural that judgment begins to fall away. And so the more one is willing to be oriented towards truth with a capital T, the more judgment tends to naturally begin to dissolve. Um, we frequently have to be thrust up against our own judgments, though. I mean, it's a process that's often quite troubling or painful, mostly because, uh, and this has nothing to do with deciding that a sunset is beautiful. That's not what we're talking about. It's the moments that are frustrated, angry, guilty, shame ridden, um, uh, um, and things like those. Whether they're directed outwards at others or whether they're directed inwards at ourselves. And um, one of the other things about it is that if we get really honest about those kinds of experiences, we begin to reconcile with the fact that they're just awful. They feel terrible. They feel terrible. There's, I'm sure, some Zen saying that I will misquote about drinking poison. And so, you know, the awareness of that was ramping up so much as well. And so, and in my own case, cracking my mind open, at least to the idea of, well, there's got to be something else. There's got to be another way, or there's got to be some other part of the story. And it always ended up being revealed that there was. Um, so yeah, I think some of it was pure grace on one hand, but I think of it a lot of it was probably also um, somewhat the result of that kind of inward inquiry on my part. I spent a lot of time digging around in my own experience and asking why I felt the way I felt, and really looking for answers, that sort of thing. So there's a lot to unpack. It was like I said, from the moment I got that message, I really spent the next bunch of years unpacking that as an idea. So
Yeah, it's a journey. So I want to ask this one last question, and then I'd like you can quickly share everybody like what you do with clients and so forth
oh, sure.
in here. But so somebody would like to know, did you find the answer to why we are all here? That's what.
Yeah.
would like.
um, yeah, I mean, I have an answer to that. I legitimately think it's one that most people wouldn't want to hear. Um, and and that's for a couple of reasons. I alluded in my own story to the experience of looking upon my own body and recognizing that I wasn't that. And it wasn't like I was like, but the body's over there and I'm over here and I'm according like equal levels of reality. Like it's a real body. It's just that it's over there and I'm over here and I'm having an out of body experience. It was not that. It was that I was looking out of the usual eyeballs down at the usual flesh and recognizing that it had this illusory quality to it. And as an illusion, if something is an illusion, it doesn't have real reality. It's a figment. It's literally nothingness appearing as something, but still fundamentally nothing. I swear to God, this answer is going somewhere. And but that's why it was so clear that if it was fundamentally nothing, it could never have contained me in the first place. How could something that doesn't even have reality do that? It can't. It doesn't. The unspoken part of that is that if the body was seen as an illusion, it was clear that everything else in this perceptual dimension was really of the same quality. And it's why nothing that happened here in this dimension of, time and space could disturb the peace. Even the pain in that body, mind bending, blackout level pain, could not disturb that peace, nor could the death of that body disturb that peace. And so what it actually did was render this entire dimension as having an illusory quality. And so part of the upside down, crazy sounding answer is, well, we're not really here because here isn't really a real place. Why would it even appear, though, to be here? Why would we be having these experiences at all? And to me, the way it makes sense is because that's the outgrowth of that separated framework of mind. If we didn't think we were here, we couldn't believe in the separation. And there's a part of our minds that wants to be separate, that wants to be special. And so we have to be separate to have that specialness. And we believe that's where the value is. And it's a simple mistake. It's an error in perception and an error in judgment. And the uh, the flip side of it is that overarching oneness in which that individuatedness is not even there, but it's so completely enveloped in that loving presence that um, there's no sense of loss in that individuatedness at all. In fact, it can even include the individuatedness. It can look upon the individuatedness and say, well, that's fine. You can do that for a moment if you like, but it's not really the real truth. And when you're ready to set that aside, you'll be reacquainted with this place that you've never left in the first place. So, um, why are we here? We're not. Why are we here? Um, because there was a part of our mind that wanted to see what it was like to be separated, and then we forgot. And so it's this illusory journey back to that underlying wholeness.
That's the tiny mad idea in A Course in Miracles, which you probably heard, or have you not?
Um, I'm, uh, uh, I believe I've heard it.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite things is so I've been studying A Course in Miracles my whole life,
You
but it wasn't
have.
until my last NDE that I got it. And what's
Mm,
really cool is Gila Barak in Israel, who's never even heard of it,
mm,
her NDE is the same.
mm,
You literally, if you were to look at A Course in Miracles,
mm,
you just almost quoted some of that stuff. And I just love that because that's the way that I connect, and many of us connect to the real world while
mm,
we're here. It helps
mm.
me kind of keep it sane. So that it's very cool what you just said. And certainly something that resonates with me, and I know a lot of people here. Um,
I appreciate that. Mm.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. And I'll send you if you want, everybody's loving your answers and enjoying your honesty and openness. So before we wrap up, I would like you to just share, um, that you do one-on-ones and group things
Oh,
and yeah.
yeah, sure. I try to reach back to literally anyone who reaches out to me. I have an almost perfect track record in that. Um, but yeah, anyone's welcome to find me or write me or be in touch. The easiest way is, guess what? There's a website. It's mine. It's at the letter. It's assistthespirit.com, and you can write me an email there. You can sign up for if you want to meet one on one. There's an opportunity for it. There's videos and articles and stuff and resources like that I've put together. Um, there's a YouTube channel. I'm not hard to find. If you plug my name into anything, you'll find things. um,
And there's a link on your website to it, right?
yes, there sure is. I'm sure there is. um, yeah, and I do. I don't think we have anything better to be doing with our time than things like this. So, um,
I 100% agree. And
yeah. So
and
yeah, I welcome people reaching out, and if you want to do this in person sometime somewhere, tell
well,
me.
yeah, you need to come to Hawaii. That was for
That's
everyone, that was our original plan.
yeah,
But
an
he
awesome idea.
he's in Seattle and I'm in LA, so
Yeah.
next time.
I will be leaving Seattle soon. And I really sincerely do not have, at this moment, I don't actually have a permanent address.
Okay. Well, come to Hawaii.
Um,
Spend some time.
well, that's a possibility. Actually, I have the sort of kind of invitation already for Kauai. Um, and that may happen briefly. I may anyway. Yeah, reach
Yeah, we
out,
have members
please.
from Hawaii that was there tonight, actually. One of the
Oh, good.
questions we asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
yeah, you've
sometimes
got
I
family
hold
all around.
I do, and sometimes I just hold like free Zoom gatherings too for people who want to come and share a little bit of silence, a little bit of presence, a little bit of healing. I usually try to do it once a month. If you just want to come check it out, anyone's welcome. Look it up on the website, and there's other options too. So
Yeah, and also if you when we put up the replay of this, it'll have all of Jonathan's information as well and a link on the YouTube so you can
cool.
yeah. So and thank you so much and thank you for the amazing messages and if everyone can keep the people in the fires and
Yes.
LA in your prayers. It's kind of scary here, but it's all going to be good.
Amen.
So, yeah. So I want to thank you all, love you all, and we will see you on January 21st to the sharing group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to, I actually have a Zoom group. It actually is tomorrow morning. It's a little early though. It's at 6 a.m. Not usually, but it is tomorrow. Come and join me if you want.
Well, do you want to stick a link real quick in the chat? Or do they just find it on the
Um,
website?
it's on the
Under
website.
events on the website.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Assistthespirit.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Come have a visit if you like. So anyway.
Thank you so much. And you all have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon. Aloha.
Amen. Aloha and namaste to all.